Welcome to the new private pesticide applicator training. This is Module 6, Reading and Understanding the Pesticide Label. My name's Mary Ann Rose, and I'm with the Ohio Pesticide Safety Education Program. Reading and understanding a pesticide label is one of the most important modules to study. In order to use a pesticide legally and effectively, you must read the entire label and follow the instructions. Because of this, there will be a label on your pesticide exam for you to answer questions about. In this section, we will discuss the key parts of a pesticide label and look at some label language. So first of all, what is the pesticide label? This is, of course, the information that's printed on or attached to the pesticide container. The label contains all information that a pesticide user needs to use that pesticide safely and effectively. So it's written specifically for the benefit of the user. Pesticide users are required by law to comply with all of the instructions on the pesticide label, I should say. Now, labeling is a related term related to label that indicates both the label and any additional manufacturer information about the pesticide product, such as informational brochures, leaflets, etc. The objective of this module, of course, is to concentrate on the pesticide label itself. These are the key sections of the pesticide label. We're going to go through each one of these, starting with the front panel, so I'm not going to mention all of these at this point. Okay, so the front panel is essentially the front page of a pesticide label. What I'm showing you are two excerpts. So there's actually the top parts of two different pesticide labels here, gramoxone and atrazine. And what I want to point out is the restricted use statement. So at registration, the U.S. EPA decides whether a pesticide will be general use or restricted use. The restricted use requiring only certified applicators may use and apply these. So it's very easy to determine whether a product is restricted use because it will always be emblazoned across the top panel, just as shown here. If you look at these two examples, you'll note that pesticides can be registered as restricted use for different reasons. So for example, with the gramoxone SL, it's restricted use due to its acute toxicity. With the herbicide atrazine, it's restricted use due to ground and surface water concerns. Now let's look at more information that's found on the front panel of the pesticide label. First, note the brand name. That's always going to appear on the pesticide label. So the brand name or the marketing name in this case is gramoxone SL, which is a herbicide used in agriculture. The SL indicates the formulation. The brand name doesn't always have the formulation, but when you see the little abbreviations following the brand name, that's what it means. SL in this case means soluble concentrate. You will learn about pesticide formulations in one of our other private pesticide applicator modules. Now, the active ingredient statement is very important. We'll look a little bit more closely at this in the next slide. The active ingredient always will give the active ingredient rather is the toxicant in the formulation that actually controls the pest. That's your objective. The active ingredient will always be identified by a common chemical name. In this example, paraquat dichloride. There's also usually a much longer descriptive chemical name that makes sense to the chemists. The other ingredients are inert ingredients. These are not the active ingredients. The manufacturer does not need to list the identity of these. One last thing I want to say about the active ingredient, the percent by weight in the product is always given, whether it's liquid or dry. So in this example, the percent by weight of paraquat dichloride, the active ingredient, is 30.1%. Looking a little bit closer at the paraquat label, notice the keep out of reach of children statement. That is going to be on every single pesticide registered in the United States. It'll appear on the front panel. Also, very important, the EPA registration number, in this case 100-1217. This number is a unique ID for every pesticide registered in the United States. And you must know about it and where to find it because it is an item that's included in your private pesticide application records that you must keep for restricted use products. The last thing I want to point out is the signal word. This indicates the acute toxicity of the material you're working with, and we'll talk more about this in other modules, but do note in this case the signal word for paraquat is danger, poison with skull and crossbones. This indicates the material is highly toxic via ingestion, inhalation, or dermal exposure. The next section of a pesticide label that I want to discuss is the first aid statement. In older pesticide labels, this was called the statement of practical treatment. This is an important section in case you experience a pesticide exposure event, either yourself or another person. It tells you what to do. And very important, if you need to seek medical help, do take the pesticide label with you because it will assist medical professionals in giving you or another person the most effective treatment in case of an exposure. The next section are the precautionary statements. This is going to describe hazards to humans and domestic animals, environmental hazards, as well as physical and chemical hazards. We're going to speak about all of these except for the last one. I just want to say that physical and chemical hazards are going to cover things like whether the material is flammable or explosive. An important part of the precautionary statements is going to be the personal protective equipment statement. Let's look at one as an example. This one says that applicators and all other handlers must wear long sleeve shirt and long pants, chemical resistant gloves, category G, such as barrier laminate or Viton in excess of 14 mils, shoes plus socks, and protective eyewear. Now, note that this product specifies very particularly that the gloves must meet certain criteria. Now, many pesticide labels will only say waterproof or gloves that are chemical resistant, but you need to read your pesticide PPE statement very carefully to make sure that you are choosing the right materials. Personal protective equipment, they're not a recommendation. It is a legal requirement for you to wear these while you're making the application. User safety recommendations also appear in the precautionary statements. These are generally common sense directions to prevent exposing yourself to pesticides. For example, users should, after applying a pesticide, wash their hands before eating, drinking, chewing gum, using the tobacco, or using the toilet. The purpose for this is to avoid contaminating yourself with pesticides. The next statement, remove clothing immediately if pesticide gets inside. Then wash thoroughly and put on clean clothing. The next part I want to talk about are the environmental hazards, a very important part of the pesticide label to read and understand. Probably the most common environmental hazard concerns water. Pesticides can get into rivers, streams. This is an example of surface water. Groundwater is often a consideration as well. So groundwater examples of that include aquifers, wells. There are many precautions that can appear on pesticide labels about water, including keeping a buffer in between the treatment zone and the source of water or the body of water. Now, the particular example on this slide is a statement for the protection of pollinators. Note the language. Application restrictions exist for this product because of risk to bees and other insect pollinators. Follow application restrictions found in the directions used to protect pollinators. So what it's doing is warning you about the material's toxicity to pollinators and referring you to other sections of the label, the directions for use, for specific things that you must do. Next, we're going to talk about the directions for use. Obviously, this is an important part of the pesticide label, and unfortunately, sometimes this is the part that pesticide applicators often go to and read this part and fail to read the rest. I want to tell you that you need to read the entire pesticide label. But at any rate, the directions for use is going to tell you how you are allowed to use the product and where you can find the sites where this product is legally allowed to be applied. Other important parts, of course, are going to be the rates and timing and mixing, etc., etc. Now, the statement in the slide, it is a violation of federal law to use this product in a manner inconsistent with its labeling. This statement appears on every pesticide registered in the United States. Typically, it's the first thing that appears under the directions for use topic heading. What it's telling you is that you must follow the label, and to go against the label is against the law. Use directions are not advice, they are requirements. Let's go ahead and look at some examples of what would be a use inconsistent with the labeling. This is what you must not do. Very important. You cannot apply a pesticide to any crop or situation not listed on the pesticide label. You cannot use more than the labeled rates. You cannot apply at more frequent intervals. Very important, you cannot ignore the PPE. You have to observe well setbacks and follow the REIs and PHIs, which we're going to define a little bit further in this presentation. Now, just looking a little bit further on the kinds of things that appear under directions for use, I already mentioned your use sites and the crops that you're allowed to use the product on, rates and timing, mixing instructions, mixing order. Also, restrictions on application conditions. For example, the wind speed, the nozzle size and droplet size, any sensitive areas, and if you need to keep buffer zones around them, grazing restrictions, entry restrictions, and the maximum amount that you can use in a year or per season, are just some of the examples of information you'll find in this section. Note, just an example that came out of the directions for use at the bottom of the slide is a whole section on spray drift management. Okay, let's define some terms now that I've already introduced you to. The restricted use entry interval is the amount of time that you have to keep people out of the treated area. This is how long they must remain out after an application. This is a particular concern in businesses where you have labor that are frequently entering fields, harvesting, etc. But it's not something that can be ignored on a small family farm either, because many pesticides used in agriculture have restricted entry intervals of 12 to 24 hours. So if your children, for example, are occasionally in the fields just for fun or for whatever, you need to make sure they stay out during these important intervals. Where do you find the information about restricted entry intervals? Typically, it is found in the agricultural use requirements box. Many pesticides will have both ag use and non-ag use requirements boxes. And it's very important that when you're using pesticides in agriculture, that you look at the proper REI. Note here it says in the middle, do not enter or allow worker entry into treated areas during the restricted entry interval of 4 hours. Sometimes the REI is found in the crop use sections. So under directions for use with each crop, that reason is because it can sometimes vary for different crops. But as I said at the beginning here of the slide, more often than not, the restricted entry interval will be found in the agricultural requirements box. Okay, pre-harvest interval. This is the period of time after a pesticide application that you must wait before the crop can be legally harvested. It will appear in pesticide labels listed under the individual crops because it can vary depending upon the crop. Now, it's different from the restricted entry interval, which is how long you have to keep people out. Once again, this is how long you have to wait for them to harvest. This is important because it protects the people who harvest the crop. Pesticides break down over time, especially in sunlight. So after 4 days, the example in this slide, there will be less pesticide residue on those crops than there was right after the application. So once again, it protects those who harvest, but it also prevents excessive residues from being in the food when it is harvested. Not observing the PHI could result in illegal residues in your crop, and it would have to be destroyed. The EPA sets those maximum allowable residues for every crop. It is called a tolerance, a pesticide tolerance. There are other types of restrictions that you may find in the directions for use section as listed here. For example, grazing restrictions, plant back intervals. Plant back intervals are how long you have to wait after a pesticide application before you can replant. So about in the middle of the slide I have an example there. And it can vary depending upon the crop. For example, the 30-day plant back for cereals and the other crops listed there, 12-month plant back for all of their crops. So what it indicates is that most crops are very sensitive. You have to wait 12 months before you can actually sow most crops. Other examples, minimum intervals between applications, maximum number of applications per season, maximum amount allowed per crop or per season. So looking at the soybean box at the bottom, tells you that the minimum interval between foliar applications is 7 days, and the maximum rates that you can use per year are 3.9 fluid ounces per acre. The next section I want to talk about is the storage and disposal section. Let's look at this language. It's critical that you follow the label when it comes to disposal. This one says that pesticide wastes are acutely hazardous. Improper disposal of excess pesticide is a violation of federal law. If these wastes cannot be disposed of by use according to label instructions, contact your state pesticide or environmental control agency, etc., etc. Okay, so that sentence, if these wastes cannot be disposed of by use according to the label, that is your key to how you, in most cases, are going to use any excess pesticide that you might have. Basically, you must use it up on a labeled site. So if you have some tank mix left, you've been spraying it, for example, in a non-crop area and it's legally registered for that use, you're simply going to have to use up the rest in a non-crop area. Under no circumstances are you allowed to dispose this through any type of drains or anything like that. That would be strictly illegal with this pesticide. So other than using up any excess pesticide on a registered site on the label, once again, you're going to have to contact your state pesticide or environmental control agency or a hazardous waste facility near you. There's no other options with this particular pesticide. The take-home message for storage and disposal: read the label carefully and stay within the label requirements. Now, I've finished looking through the key sections of a pesticide label. There's one more document that I want to talk about. It is called a safety data sheet. This is separate from the pesticide label. It is another type of document that's designed to communicate the hazards associated with any hazardous substance, pesticides being only a small subset of hazardous substances. So manufacturers prepare safety data sheet for any hazardous substance. Formerly, this document was called a material safety data sheet. In the last 3 or 4 names, they have changed it to safety data sheet. Once again, it's required for any type of hazardous substance, not just pesticides. There are requirements if you fall under OSHA. The Department of Transportation has requirements for transporting hazardous materials, has requirements for safety data sheets, and employers in many cases must make safety data sheets available to any employees that are working with a hazardous substance. So, in contrast to the pesticide label, which is written for the pesticide user, the SDS sheet really has a much broader audience. What is on this sheet is a very complete information of what the potential hazards of the substance are. So very detailed physical and chemical hazard statements. Also more information about health risks associated with the material. The pesticide label only gives you the signal word, only gives you the acute toxicity of the material. And then of course tells you what precautions you must take when you're using it. The safety data sheet gives more information about long-term health risks. Now, the last thing I want to say is that when you purchase a pesticide from a dealer, they should provide you with the safety data sheet. This is the end of the module on reading and understanding the pesticide label. Now you may take the Weed Kill Label quiz, which is part of this course, and also I would direct you to your private course study guide on pages 16 to 25. There's also a quiz that you may take on those pages. This is the end of Module 6.